track is a little bit special. I mean, what do you do now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I graduated from Lehigh 4 years ago, which is kind of funny because I've been in many different departments. I first started in finance. Then I feel like I had to grab some courses in statistics and engineering, which is easy to get a job at that time. So I picked some courses in mathematics and engineering school. After graduations, I went into a consulting company for 2 years, which I was able to work with clients on a lot of data projects. And after that, I joined the Walmart 2 years ago and as a manager in operations. So currently, we're focusing on e-commerce. We're growing and we're competing against Amazon. So there's a lot of initiatives there. I'm working under customer care department, which means we have to focus a lot on customer data. For example, like if we're getting a lot of customer issues regarding specific topic, we have to use our data scale to dive in and understand what exactly is that issue and try to provide insights for the leadership. And we also have to track business performance. So we create our own matrix. For example, like we'll look at customer satisfaction and customer repeat contacts, things like that, to make sure we're saving the cost for the operations team and we're generating maximum revenues. So yeah, there's a lot of data analytics skill included and a lot of technologies. For example, we use Google Cloud Platform, so which means we can manage our database from the cloud and we can pull the data and generate the visualizations right from there. So it's a pretty much a tech savvy role, and we have to work with a lot of vendor partners, which includes a lot of communications. So yeah, that's pretty much about what I'm doing now.
So
Happy to answer any questions you've had.
Sure. How did you prepare? And then I'm sure Dara and company have questions for you in Idris, but how did you prepare for this role? I mean, how did you learn everything that you know now? From a technical perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that I'm preparing for it is first I'm looking, before I go to this role, I'm looking at what projects a lot of companies, especially those big companies, technology companies like Flag, we're now currently looking at. For example, I know my company is focusing a lot on customer journey analysis. So I'm diving into some of those examples and look at what technology can be leveraged for those. For example, people use a lot of Python, like in data science, right? So I know Python is definitely important. I know people also using A/B testing for it because they have to understand for different initiatives, what are the customer responses. So those two things are pretty important regarding any data science role. So I use the data camp. I'm pretty sure every Lehigh student should have free access to that. So I use that as a starting point to learn about the technologies and some fundamentals of that. And after that, so I try to grab some interesting projects. Like you can find a lot of projects online, right? So those are free. And I dive into the examples where people are using their solutions. So I'm looking at what they are doing and what are each of the steps people are taking. So I'm trying to mimic the person that I think which are great. And I'm also trying to do some mock interviews, which you can pay for it, or there are some free ones you can leverage online. So I'm telling the interviews my ideas. I'm trying to get some feedback and what I can improve. So I'm focused on those specific areas. For example, like at very first beginning, I'm pretty good at technical skills. I'm able to explain anything about math or the technology I'm using, but I'm not able to tell them what's the impact of my project because I don't have this effective communication. So I have to focus on that and try to phrase that and be prepared because they're gonna ask you in every single interview, like, what's the impact of the project? You have to make it reasonable. So that's basically how I learned for it. First, you look at what an industry are doing. If you have someone in that company or even in that team, that's great. Just talk to them and understand what are their pain points, what do they want to solve, and what technology they use. And then you try to Google it and try to have some hands-on experience with the project. Then when you go to the interview session, you just talk about things you're doing. That's their favorite part. If you just talk about like, I know Python, I know all this stuff, that's not enough. You gotta talk about the projects and things you've done. So
You know what? It's
that's
interesting you
pretty much
said that, Zia, because now, I mean, you didn't get to benefit that when you were in the program, but now, and in fact, after that, Dara, maybe you could talk a little bit about the project that you're working on. But basically, all the students now have projects. I mean, they have a capstone, but it's part of the capstone, but then it goes on all year, right? And the projects are not with the faculty, but are with third party. And it's exactly right. So you realize that you needed that to interview and talk. So now I am implementing that in the curriculum. In addition to that, you mentioned mock interviews. I'm also doing that now, where preparing the students to explain, right, and tell their stories. And because it depends what you want to do. You are more a data scientist. Other students, they end up working in a hedge fund, other working in risk, and other working in consulting like KPMG and things like that. So I think it's important that to do that. Dara, can you talk a little bit about your project very quickly, and then maybe ask him questions that you want?
Yeah, sure. Nice to meet you. It's great to hear about your experience.
nice to meet you.
Yeah, so my project focuses on alternative data, which I guess it's very, I mean, so basically we get alternative data sources and we try to look for some form of alpha that could aid in trading. And we're focusing purely on commodities. So for alternative data, what we're using is weather data, and we're seeing the effects on the price of the coffee commodity. Yeah, just strictly in the US. So we're getting weather data from various sources where the coffee is grown. So Brazil, Colombia, we just got like a list of the top locations, put all that together. We got parameters like temperature, humidity, other things like that. And then we kind of ran some statistical tests against the price of coffee. As you would imagine, it wasn't very good at first. So we started thinking of adding other parameters such as like demand parameters, right? So things like the commitment of traders, people who have like speculative positions in coffee, what do they think is going to happen? So we got all that data put together, and now we're in the process of running like tests using that as well to kind of like build a model that has both demand and supply side that can predict what the price is going to be. So that's just the short version of what we're doing.
Yep.
And it's very interesting what you said, because when I first started, I mean, I didn't have so much. I mean, I have taken data camp courses, but then you can literally see the difference between thinking of it as, you know, just a beginner Python programmer and someone who now knows the libraries that you can use. It's a very big difference between the two. So yeah, you're 100% right. It gives you real world experience on how to actually use these different functions. So it's definitely been a good experience.
No, that's definitely amazing. I'm glad you're talking about coffee because I'm a huge fan of coffee. You probably wouldn't be able to see it because I blurred my background, but I have two very big espresso machines. So I,
Really?
brew my own coffee every day. So that's just simply great. I like that project. I know you've probably done a lot of Python packages with those. I'm just curious, like, is there any specific reasons you are initiating this project, or is just something you're interested in?
Well, originally, I mean, alternative data is a lot of things, right? You can basically pick from anything. But there was someone who was a part of the project before, and he suggested it. I guess it wasn't exactly this when it first started, but over time, it sort of changed because of the data we have available, right? So at first, what initially was what's the difference between forecasted weather and actual weather, right? So if you have like a 10-day forecast, what was the difference when the actual 10 days comes? What's the difference between what actually happened and what was predicted? And can the difference have an impact on the price? So it was very hard to get the forecasted weather data because, I mean, once it's not correct, most people will get rid of that. So we couldn't actually find that. And then we kind of like just changed it into what it is now. And I mean, I picked coffee because I like coffee as well. I mean, I don't have an espresso machine and everything. I mainly use a French press. So yeah.
That's
But
amazing.
originally it was a project with a firm in Israel, and they had giving us access to what was that, Dara? Google information, Google searches, Google traffic. I'm sorry, Google traffic. Remember?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were giving us access to I think we're tracking live stores and we're monitoring the traffic, like customer traffic into live stores, and we're trying to see how that traffic is going to affect the stock price of the company. I think that's more what it was when we first started. So they had access to all those type of data and also like Twitter data as well for specific companies. I think our first approach was we were going to scrape through the financials and put that together and try to see how the traffic together with the financials would affect the stock price. That's what it was initially. I think this was during the summer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to know. I think that's a good point there. Because like, a lot of interviews, I keep asking people like, why are you initiating these programs? Because like currently we have hundreds of projects that we can initiate, right? But we just don't have the bandwidth with that. So the first questions we probably ask ourselves is like, what is the most important one? And is there any alternatives or why we're doing this? So I think you made a great point there. Like, this is how it originated. And being able to explain that is giving a signal to the interviews that, you know, this is the best way. This is the best approach. I've done my homework, and this is the reason I'm doing this. And by doing that, I'm bringing impact to my business, and it's worth it, right? So quick and simple. But there's tons of candidates who are not even able to explain why they're doing this and just telling me like, because I have that project, I have to work on it, so I work on it. They don't even know the impact of that. So I think the point you made was great there, but just a heads up that we focus on each of your projects or experience and be able to understand why you're doing that and what impact you can bring to the business. So that's just my 2 cents there, if that making sense to you.
Yeah, of course. Definitely. Thanks for that. It's definitely good advice.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great example, by the way.
Yeah.
Any questions for our guest?
Yeah. So, we're working on a project where basically the overarching idea is to try to sort of predict changes in corporate bond ratings. So basically, when a company issues debt, they get rated by different companies. And basically, if there's a more so importantly for the downgradings than upgradings, if there's a downgrade on their debt, that can, really affect the price. And sort of, how Moody's and other companies like that rate this debt is sort of a bit of a black box. So the idea is to, try to find out, what they're looking at in order to anticipate the rating change. And then, basically if we see something that makes us think the rating is going to be downgraded, obviously, sell the bond or short it or whatever. But that's sort of the overarching idea. And so far, the number one thing we've learned is how important the data analysis and data management is, because we've sort of spent most of our time so far just getting the data to a point where it can be analyzed, which, was sort of, I think, a really, really good lesson, because I think, when you're on the outside, it's like, oh, this is such an easy thing, we'll just write a few lines of code and, whatever. And then in reality, it's like, this is, this is, much more complicated and difficult. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, something that you can't learn unless you do it, which I think has been a really good part of the project so far.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I think that's a pretty fun project. You are more of an expert in that field than I am right now, but I probably have just some general questions. Like I'm just curious, like, so you mentioned you encounter some challenges and difficulties. Like I'm just curious, what's the biggest difficulty when you're working on this project so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think so far, I mean, it's something we've talked about in the past of, sort of Python being sort of a unique language where, it seems like there's almost always an easy way to do something. You just have to know how to do it. And I think just sort of, there's not really an easy way to learn it, except for learning it. So I think, certain sort of functions in Python, ultimately, I guess to give a specific example, was basically we had some data that was I guess on a daily basis, and we wanted to resample it to monthly, which sounds so simple, right? And first, I tried using maybe a for loop or something like that, and then I actually, struggled with it, tried to Google it, tried to figure it out. And then I eventually called an actual family member of mine who's a data scientist. And literally over the phone, I explained the problem to him. And he's like, oh, just do this, make it a pivot table and just do this. And I mean, I didn't even need to send him an email or show him, just because he had that experience. He knew exactly what to do. And in, 10 seconds, he helped me solve a problem that I'd been working on for 2 weeks. So that type of thing, and then now going forward, I know how to do that. And, so I think, that the sort of specific Python sort of tricks, I think has been sort of difficult, but also in the end easier. So that's, that was really, that's sort of been the overarching theme is sort of, that Python is easy in some ways and, sort of difficult in others. And,
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's just great to learn some new tech skills. Like I know there's tons of packages out there in Python, and that's definitely not easy to handle at the very beginning. It's also pretty painful for me to do that as well, unless you get used to it. So that's a great example. Just a heads up there, like I know you mentioned being able to manipulate Python has been difficulty for you. You probably also would want to talk about your approaches and the methodologies in this project. Like we're talking about difficulties, right? If you are saying, hey, I don't know this package, but after learning for a couple of days or Googling it or asking people for support, I figured that out. I mean, that's great, but can we go extra mile and see what else you can share with the interviewer and the companies? Because like packages and languages, you can just pick that up in a company. Company will give you up to 6 months to learn it, right? So they never worry about it. What they worry about is your analytical mindset. Like if I tell people, hey, I'm using this approach, I know all the packages, but eventually I'm not getting the numbers I'm expecting because I'm using a wrong model or I'm using a wrong approach. Then that's kind of like music to the ear. They would like to listen to that because they want to learn how you're working on that instead of like, hey, I use this package, which is not good, then I switch to another one and it worked. I mean, I'm not just saying those are not difficult. I'm just saying if we can give them high level stuff, that's even better. So that's just from an interviewer's perspective. Because like if you don't know packages, that's totally fine. We can teach you, right? You can Google it or whatever. But the more important is that you have to have this analytical mindset and like what are each of those steps. So we want to hear more about those high level stuff. If that's making sense to you, just a heads up there. But other than that, I think the way you're explaining your project is great. Everything is making sense to me. I like the way you are communicating your project, like you started with why you're doing this, because down trading is important than up trading. So that's why we really want to predict it. And it's really hard to predict it right now, but it's important to the company. So that's the reason you are initiating that. So that's something I want to hear. So that's great. Overall, I would say that's definitely making my expectations. And there's room for improvement. Thanks a lot for sharing.
I mean, I think it's important to always be able to tell your project very quickly because sometimes you don't have that much time. Zian, are you with us?
Yeah.
Zian Zhu, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you tell us about Project 11 a little bit?
Yes, I'm working on a BSS model project, use neural network, but in fact, we plan to use neural network. What we are doing now is just testing which method is best to work for the model. So like ANN linear model, we use K folders, and now the sponsor want us to test the mean absolute error of each program, method, and make it to a heat map. Yeah, heat map. We are still working on it, and then we can see which method works best, and we will use it on our BSS model. With BSS model, then we will work on to use the model to predict the price of options. Yeah.
Awesome.
As you can see, it's, I think you probably would have benefited if you had so many projects right ahead of you starting to look for a job. Hey, Zima, while we still have maybe a few minutes, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the market right now in terms of data, in terms of, where's, you have Chat GPT, you got all these things coming into the market. What's the trend out there?
Yeah, I'm glad you are asking. That's a great topic there. I know people are talking about ChatGPT every day. Like I'm a paid membership of their subscriptions, and people worry about it they getting replaced by ChatGPT. But I can tell you for now that we don't have to worry about it for at least 5 years. It's pretty intelligent. I use it on a daily basis with coding or whatever questions I have, but it's just not smart enough to replace our jobs. So we can just, focus on searching for jobs and stuff. And regarding market, I know people care a lot about inflations and stuff and layoff because Seattle, it's been crazy here. Over 20,000 software engineers and data scientists get laid off in Seattle and the Bay Area recently, which is crazy. But the good thing is it's getting better. I'm pretty sure companies will hire more people in Q3 and Q4, which is during summer and fall. So